So yeah, man, back about this coronavirus demonstration. But I wanted to make something clear from my last video, and I want people to have a great understanding of what I'm explaining in science. When I was talking about how viruses can evolve and resist, our vaccines or our antivirals that we have to go against the viruses. I also included in my other video, I was trying to explain bacteria, antibiotics. But of course, you cannot use antibiotics on viruses. Sometimes they can also boost certain conditions. So what I was trying to talk about is the resistance of how bacteria can also resist antibiotics and how viruses can evolve and also have a resistance to antivirals or our vaccines that we create. So they all have their own levels of morphologies that they go through of mutations and changes their positions. Viruses depend on a host in order to survive. Compared to bacteria, bacteria can live outside or inside of a body or a host. Bacteria itself, you have good bacteria, you have bad bacteria. Bacteria itself, when it becomes, the ones that's bad, you know, um, you have the pathogenic bacterial conditions in some cases that can be bad for the human species or for a human. So you have your good bacteria and you have your bad bacteria. But sometimes overusage of antibiotics and bacteria, and I'm just bringing this up so people can understand. I don't want people to get it mixed up because the coronavirus isn't a bacteria. This is a virus. And the virus structure is smaller than bacteria. And when I talked about how you can't use a regular microscope or you can't use a microscope, I wasn't talking about you cannot use a light microscope to measure viruses because it's too small. You have to either use electronic microscopes or x-ray microscopes in order to measure it. This is not the same. So you can't measure a virus with a regular microscope. It's impossible. So light microscopes you can't measure. You have to use electron microscopes to measure it. But the thing about this corona shit that I was trying to explain, I want to talk about that wet market. Some people believe it's man-made. Some people think, it's created in the lab. But we have to understand what goes on in those wet markets, or especially in Wuhan, China, or in a lot of wet markets, even when you study Ebola. Again, like I said, coronaviruses isn't new. You hear coronas before, and that's common in animals. But not just that, but this virus kind of mutated. You had MERS, which is Middle Eastern Respiratory Disorder, a Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. You have the SARS, which is what we know, which is a severe acute respiratory syndrome. And then you have this newer version of that, which is the SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-2, which is the severe acute respiratory syndrome 2 or COVID-2 or whatever. But bottom line is that when you deal with these wet markets, man, these wet markets is fucked up because they have all types of exotic animals in Wuhan, China, where this shit happened at. It's all types of exotic animals that they use coming from wherever. And the shit that goes on in the environment in there, the nasty wet ice that melt, the slaughtering of animals, the distress levels in the environment with these animals, all sitting around one another, getting cut up and butchered. And then you got an audience of people standing around to get this meat from these different exotic animals, all types of wild seafood, all types of wild, different creatures, cutting them up and butchering it. If you were not even dealing with, of how they say it, but it makes sense that the virus could have came from that because what happens is that, again, a lot of these viruses are already common in species, and the viruses that get us sick usually comes from animals. So what happens is that the stress levels and all that stuff with these animals, they viruses, the different environment, bloodshed, and all these openings, like your eyes is open, your mouth is open, you got a nose hole, all that. All this stuff is going on around you. And what happens is that the viruses of them can kind of leak out, like in a sense of a horizontal transference type of condition. If you look up horizontal gene transference, but look up the stage of it with a horizontal transference type of thing. And all this stuff is going on because the wet market is nasty. The stalls is nasty and different things the way they do it. But all this stuff going on, those viruses can kind of mingle and swap and rub up against each other's genome and create a different whole type of virus and start to spread. This is what goes on in these so-called wet markets. But I really want to talk about that, man, about what's going on. My brother Rob Bowen did an excellent video, man, about keeping up the immunities, man, and making sure your immune system's up, making sure you're working out, making sure you're taking care of your body, making sure you stay active. All this stuff help boost your immunities. You got to keep those human leukoantigens up, or those T cells up, so they can be in the proper line of defense when certain things try to invade. But I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to keep saying it. This so-called virus isn't a joke, but it's nothing to fear. I think if your immunities is up and you clean, you're taking care of your hands, your personal hygiene, like washing your hands and different things, I think you'll be fine. I talked about in the last video, because I usually freestyle. Like, I'm freestyling right now, and I'm literally sitting in my car, and I'm trying to talk about different things. I said take high C, but what I was trying to say is take your vitamin C. Make sure you get your vitamin C. Make sure you take, eat foods that's high in antioxidants. Make sure, you take in proper things that's going to be beneficial to the immunity in order to boost. It's just not going to be food that help you, though. You also got to move around. You got to stay active. You got to be, moving around, stay active, and keep those defenses up against certain things that try to invade. So I just wanted to make that clear. So I also wanted to make clear to the audience between, the difference between bacteria and viruses. When I was talking on the video, I was talking about the resistance as a whole. You know what I'm saying? You can't use an antibiotic on a virus. That's correct. You use antibiotics on bacteria. But bacteria can become resistant to antibiotics. The same way our antivirals that we create can develop its own morphology involved and become resistant to so-called virus. Viruses can become resistant to our antivirals or our vaccines that we create. So we have to understand the morphology and how pathogens work and the morphology and changes. And that's why I always go back to evolution. Understanding natural selection and evolution, man. So I want to make that clear. You know what I'm saying? So people won't be confused with the information. And I want to make it clear about how I understand, of what's going on. I don't want people to see certain things and be like, they get confused or think I'm saying something that I'm not. I want to make that clear about how this stuff works and what's going on. But keep those immunities up. Peace, love, and happiness.